Hi, I'm Rob and welcome to the Uncut Network. Every month we rotate between directors, actors and super specific genres. We cover everything from exploitation to things your parents will absolutely approve of, relative unknowns to household names, and everything in between. The Uncut Network is the movie podcast of all the niches, and to cover all of those things and more, I'm joined by Graham. Hello there.
Hello.
And making her debut on the podcast, Charlotte.
Ahoy.
Great to have you.
Hello.
How are you both doing? I know it's football season, and this is not a good question to ask either of you, I'm assuming.
I didn't realise we were recording when the match was on until it was pointed out to me, so yeah, that shows how much attention I pay to this stuff.
Yeah, I had similar. I was thinking, I wonder when my housemate's going to get back to watch the football. What time's the football? Oh, the exact same time we're recording. Oh, I really don't care about this that much.
Yeah. But are you both doing well otherwise? Both doing good?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on some very over-ambitious gallery art stuff up at Scarborough, which is great fun. And I keep plugging away for the Geek show, of course. I do a lot of stuff on the Patreon and the main site.
You're not setting anybody in fire like the only other bit of art I know that's ever happened in Scarborough. What was it called? St. Maud?
Oh, of course, yeah. I briefly sort of racking my brain trying to work out when they did a real-life Wicker Man, but yes, St. Maud. I drove past the Grotty Amusement Arcade that Morford Clark walks past, and I thought, oh wow, yeah, that's a little piece of cinema history.
Wasn't it your theory, Graham, that Morford Clark looks like a different person in every movie she's in? She just sort of evolves completely.
I mean, sometimes she doesn't even wait for it to be a separate movie. Armando Iannucci always says he loves the fact that no one ever realises she plays a double role in his version of David Copperfield.
Yeah, and I still didn't know. It was kind of like a what moment?
Yeah.
Yes. It's not Morford Clark. Is that how you pronounce that anyway? Because Welsh pronunciations are kind of beyond me a little bit.
I think that is Morford. Yeah, I think Morford Clark is right.
Yeah, we're not talking about her today. We are on directors. Or it could also be an actors episode because he is one of these multi-hyphenates that did a lot of stuff. But Rob Reiner, probably most famous for his run mid-80s to early mid-90s, wasn't it really? That sort of time span, a good decade. But before we looked at these movies, before we reviewed these movies, without having any sort of recency bias of watching a movie, what was your feelings on sort of Rob Reiner and his work, Charlotte?
So I've loved The Princess Bride since I was about 14. There's a whole backstory to like why I watched it then, and the Cliff Notes edition. I was doing media studies GCSE, and I started to analyse everything I watched, film, TV, advert. And I couldn't just enjoy it. And I think my parents, for whatever reason, recognised my love of fantasy, comedy, romance and adventure. And were like, we're going to try this film. And that's how I became aware of him. But I don't think I ever linked all of those films together until way more recently. And it's just incredible what he did, like with that run, as you mentioned. Yeah.
I do have the run-up here. It is from 1984 to 92. I mean, Gav previously referenced North, but I'm not sure whether that's really counted in that run. I think it stops at A Few Good Men.
North is generally regarded as the combo breaker. I think the one he did after it, The American President, has its fans. So you can say there's a solid 11 years with one big slip in there. I think most people would agree.
There's not a lot of directors that have that sort of consistency. Especially in the 90s. The 90s were an odd decade for a lot of directors, really.
And to do it solidly in the middle of mainstream Hollywood as well. I mean, there are directors that I can think of who've made, this many great films back to back, but they tend to be in the arena where people just let them get on with making whatever it is they want to make. Whereas Rob Reiner is knocking out basically a classic a year for the back half of the 80s in saleable genres, completely within the mainstream of Hollywood. And yeah, somehow that works. Somehow he's not remembered as like a commercial hack. He's remembered as someone who made diverse personal films in an environment that isn't always conducive to that.
Absolutely. He had much more of a career as an actor, and apparently he started as a comedian before that, which again he truly earns the multi-hyphenate. But he started off making a short before launching into the first of our 3 movies that we'll talk about. This is Spinal Tap. I think the short he did before that was also, I don't know if it was a short, I'm assuming it's a short, it's just labelled as Spinal Tap, the Final Tour in 1980. So what that is, I'm not sure, because it's not exactly accessible, I guess.
Yeah, the thing with Spinal Tap is because it's improvised, or largely improvised, he had to make a sort of proof of concept short to show any financial backers exactly what he was going for. There were bits of that in the final film, but there are also big subplots that are missing.
And the other 2 movies we'll be doing The Princess Bride and 1990's Misery.
Your first drummer was
the Beeper. John Stumpy Pepys.
Oh, yeah.
Great, tall, blonde geek with glasses.
Yeah. Good drummer.
Great look, good drummer. Good drummer. Fine.
What happened to him?
He died. He died in a bizarre gardening accident some years back.
It's really one of those things. It was, the authorities said, best leave it unsolved, really.
And he was replaced by
Stumpy Joe. Eric Stumpy Joe Childs.
And what happened to Stumpy Joe?
Well, it's not a very pleasant story, but he died. He choked on. The official explanation was he choked on vomit.
It was actually someone else's vomit. It's not.
Exactly.
There's no real.
Well, they can't prove whose vomit it was. They don't have facilities in Scotland Yard to print.
You can't really dust for vomit.
Now, during the Flower People period, who was your drummer?
Stumpy's replacement, Peter James Bond, he also died in mysterious circumstances. We were playing a
festival,
jazz blues festival. Where was that?
Well, blues jazz, really.
Blues jazz festival.
It was in the Isle of Lucy.
The Isle of Lucy.
Isle of
Jazz
Lucy.
and Blues Festival.
And it was tragic, really. He exploded on stage.
Just like that.
He just went up.
He just was like a flash of green light. And that was it. Nothing was left.
Look at his face.
Well, there was.
It's true. This really did happen.
There was a little green globule on his drum seat.
It's like a stain, really.
It was more of a stain than a globule, actually. And
dozens of people spontaneously combust each year. It's just not really widely reported.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll keep it chronological. The first of that 3, as we just mentioned, was This is Spinal Tap. So, Graham, I think you've set up your knowledge base there pretty well beforehand.
I have, yeah. I am a huge tap head, which is the acknowledged nomenclature. Do you want me to give you a synopsis?
And if you can, yeah. It's a loose one, but if you can.
It's a pretty plot-light film, although when you go back to it, there is a lot of structure in there, but it's the story of a British heavy metal band, Spinal Tap, who are embarking on what they think is going to be a huge tour that turns around their ailing commercial fortunes, documented by a fantastic, pretentious film director called Marty DeBurgey, played by Rob Reiner, of course, multi-hyphenate thing. As the tour goes on, and the girlfriend of the lead singer David St. Hubbins exerts more control over the project, it becomes apparent that Spinal Tap's career is actually failing, and the band may indeed split up during the course of this tour.
Yeah, that's pretty perfect, honestly. Yes. So, Charlotte, what's your feelings on Spinal Tap? This is Spinal Tap.
So I didn't watch this till I was at uni, when I got really into reading classic rock books. I was always a Bowie fan, but I read a lot of kind of biographies, autobiographies, and it felt natural to then watch the film that, took the mick out of that. And I liked it a lot of the time, but I realised I don't think I had any friends at that point who had watched it. So I didn't quote it that much. And rewatching it this week, I realised I don't I haven't memorised it like some people do. I'm not is it a tap head? You said, Graham.
A tap head, yeah.
I appreciate the film a lot, but I think it's one of those things where I think it's the film that lots of people I love that film. And especially, it was so hard to get hold of it. I was lucky I had the DVD copy because it's not available on any streaming sites and you can't buy it on most of the ways, like Amazon, that kind of thing. That I wonder how many people now are coming to it anew. If we're going to have a whole generation never
Quite
seen
possibly.
it.
Yeah, I think I had a similar sort of start to my relationship with it. I was far more interested in music than films as a kid. So I think one thing that we're going to have as a recurring theme on this podcast is that like all of these films come to you in a cloud of quotes before you actually watch the film. And so I had heard Appeal becoming more selective, turn it to 11, all of those fabulous. I think every great line in this sort of encapsulates a rock cliche, doesn't it? It's like none more black is just a perfect phrase for a certain attitude of looking at rock and roll. And I think it's uncommonly good in that. And when you consider that most of this is coming off the top of these guys' heads, I mean, staggering stuff, I think.
Yeah, it's curious now because it feels I know it's classic rock as it would be fair to now, but it's so alien to what we experience now as sort of the rock experience. I mean, these sorts of rock bands don't exist anymore. I don't mean in a stylistic sense. I mean just sort of in the personality stakes, in the idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Most rock bands now are, well, to put it politely, they're also nerds too. Most of the case.
But I think that's part of the film's legacy. I think there's a generation of like young people who wanted to be in a rock band who watched This Is Spinal Tap and thought, right, the goal is to not be that.
Yes. I mean, it just feels like such an artifact now, and it's given it an odd quality that it just doesn't feel of this world anymore, which I think adds to the mythos of it, really. And this is what this movie is an awful lot of. It's all mythos, because we're basically trading in the stock and story of a band that doesn't exist, which is fascinating, really.
It's interesting, some of those things you mentioned. I was thinking about Right Here, Right Now, the Ghost movie about the Swedish death metal band. I don't know if you've seen the concert. It's like 3 hours long. I was at the premiere for it a couple of weeks ago. My friend Clarice is like a massive fan of theirs. And I'm thinking now, I'm just linking This Is Spinal Tap in. There are these asides where he kind of parodies This Is Spinal Tap and that kind of rock star. There's a whole lore for this band that he's created and this mythology and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering whether that could then encourage some young people to then go and see This Is Spinal Tap, because that kind of self-awareness and that parody, having that platform again, is really interesting. 40 years after the film?
I think that's very similar to what sort of sent me to see it. I wanted to see why a lot of my favourite bands kept making jokes about Stonehenge.
The 18-inch tall Stonehenge.
It's such a great scene. I do think that history is one of the film's great achievements. I suppose, again, it's an ad-libber's paradise, isn't it? There's that great scene where Reiner's sat reading out all of the awful reviews that they've got over the course of their career. And improvisers love that sort of stuff because it's a format where you can just keep going for as long as you can keep making stuff up.
So did I read correctly that they filmed this over 5 weeks and then edited in a narrative? Is that right?
I don't know the time frame of it, but yeah, I mean, the 5 weeks thing is astonishing, but it wouldn't surprise me because there are all sorts of subplots that aren't in it. Like, Rob was on an episode of Pop Screen where we talked about Sherry Curry from The Runaways, and there was a whole subplot with her as the tour support.
Really?
And the only hint of that in the finished film was there was like a subplot about her giving all of the members of the band VD, and that's why in the early stages of the film they've all got like spots on their lips. But yeah, whole chunks of narrative. There's a whole other bit with the Sinatra-loving taxi driver that just does not exist in the film apart from that one scene. And I think, like, I have a theory about cult films, that the thing that makes a film a cult film is that you can imagine even the smallest parts in it have their own history. And I think the shooting method means that is literally true with This Is Spinal Tap. Usually the smallest parts of it had like a half-hour subplot that ended up on the cutting room floor.
It's very impressive that it was edited so well then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the whole process... I mean, with documentaries, you do have to plan a narrative as much as you can plan a narrative. But a lot of it is found in the edit room. But with this, the fact that it was improvisational, the editor is some sort of genius, frankly, for it to be anywhere near as coherent as it is.
It is absolutely incredible, and I think it's helped along by the fact that you have this extraordinary central trio of Christopher Guest, Michael McKean and Harry Shearer, who, you know, are still able to just switch into it like that. They still do public appearances and interviews and things as Spinal Tap, and they can always channel those characters.
How optimistic are you both for the sequel? Either the sequel coming out or how good the sequel will be?
I mean, I have my fears. I'd like to think that, like, I've never read so much as an interview where those three were in character, which hasn't made me laugh at least once. So I think there'll be something good in it, but it gets us into the area of like late period Rob Reiner, which we haven't. We've talked a lot about that 80s to 90s hot streak, but we haven't talked much about what comes after, have we?
It's quite obscure, frankly. It's he occasionally hits upon something decent, but that's as much as you've really got from him. Or beyond that, it's like wild passion projects that haven't landed an audience, or I guess that's the best it really gets, really, for him in that post classic era. But as far as this one, if it's the same sort of process, I guess, I do think there's a story to be told with aging rock bands, retirement tours, that I think they'd get a great deal of greatness out of, to be honest. But I doubt they have that same level of stamina, that same level of ability as filmmakers, given that the fall-off of his career has been so harsh.
It's quite weird because the film that they're following up, the 40-year-old film they're following up, is already about this band being embarrassing past it dinosaurs. So you think, well, where do they go from there, really?
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to find out if it ever actually happens, because it does feel like one of these things that may be lost in development hell.
Because I think it started
it's
filming.
It's a great idea.
In February, I saw it started filming.
Ah, okay.
Well, I hope it's good, but it risks the it's such a left wing reference, but it's like when they did the sequel, The Shining, and one of the big references there was, who is this for? Nobody who would go to see this sort of movie even knows what The Shining is. So all of these references to a movie that nobody knows what it is or what it's going for, which I thought was a ridiculous thing. Loads of people love The Shining, and it's the same here, but I imagine that'll be a very big reservation in the studio's heads. Like, will they get this joke? Do we have to explain it? Do we have to do cutaways? It's the product of a different studio system, which I think is the thing to worry about, not the people involved, maybe. I don't know. I'm just sort of spitballing here.
Zoolander's quite a good example of how it really worked the first time and then just didn't recreate the magic the second.
Yeah. I think one note of optimism is that Spinal Tap 2 is being produced by Castle Rock Entertainment, which is the independent company that Reiner co-founded in 1987, which I think, Rob, if you want to do the slickest segue we've ever managed on this show, I think that's the opening.
Well, yes, but I'll have to restructure it, and no, we're going with chronological, not... Because Castle Rock, isn't that is a Stephen King reference, isn't it? A TV show was made.
It is, but
based on his.
But 87, it is the Stephen King reference. But 1987 takes you. It's The Princess Bride, Rob. That's the year Princess Bride came out. Somehow we've de-slicked the segue.
Oh, okay, I completely got the wrong segue. I'm sorry. Okay.
He's climbing the rope. And he's gaining on us.
Inconceivable.
Faster! I thought I was going faster.
You were supposed to be this Colossus. You were this great legendary thing, and yet he gains.
Well, I'm killing 3 people, and he got on to himself.
I do not accept excuses. I'm just going to have to find myself a new giant, that's all.
Don't say that, Vincini, please.
Did I make it clear that your job is at stake?
I'll take that segue, even if I got the wrong one, and run with it. So 1987's Princess Bride. Charlotte, I think I have to ask you what that is.
Plot summary, Princess Bride. Okay, we open with a grandfather reading a story to his sick grandson. And the story, supposedly within that book, within those pages, is a story of adventure and love and trickery and evil rulers and true love and the wonders of friendship and revenge. Will that do?
Yeah, that's very true. And that story is, of course, the film we see. Yeah.
And it's got a frankly ridiculous cast in this too.
It's so good.
I mean, the fact that it's got like such throwaway roles of people like Carol Kane, Peter Cook, Mel Smith.
To link on to Spinal Tao, Christopher Guest.
Indeed.
That was a slick segue.
Yeah. It's an odd movie, really, isn't it? Because it's both a classical fantasy and it's poking fun at classical fantasy.
The temptation is to sort of compare it to something like Shrek, but I think the big difference here is that when the Princess Bride wants you to get actively swept away in the romance and the adventure, it does it unapologetically. It is both a parody and a perfect example of what it is meant to be.
And I think nothing epitomises that more than it's like 3 minutes in when "as you wish" is supposedly means "I love you." And I remember that was the line that hooked me into the film, because I was thinking, like, grammatically this doesn't work as a phrase. What does that mean? But you believe it and you buy in it. It's almost so earnest, it's unearnest.
Yes. I think part of the reason why that works is this framing device of the grandfather, played by Peter Falk, by the way, the great Peter Falk, manfully struggling against one of the worst fake moustaches in film history. But I think that framing device replicates how the audience for a film like this, or a book like this, because it was a novel before it was a film, how you sort of appreciate that, because the grandson is really impatient with the story. The grandson is always urging the granddad to get to the good parts, and the granddad has to sort of argue for the inclusion of anything with kissing in, and Goldman has said that when he was writing the novel, that really liberated him, because he had lots of plot ideas but no way of getting to them, and the way that he gets to them is you just skip to the good parts.
It's an interesting artifact, really, because I don't know sort of the chronology, there we go, I got the word out eventually, but the whole idea of meta movies, this wasn't the first. There was ones before it, like Airplane and Police Squad and what have you. But this is sort of the model that they've all took since, and it's not really talked about as a influential item in that regard, which I think is interesting.
And I think it couldn't have, because of the source material. Have either of you read the book?
I never have, no. I actually reread before we did this Which Lie Did I Tell by William Goldman, which talks a bit about how he wrote the book and how he wrote the film, but the book itself, no, never have.
Because the book has a meta element to it in two areas. It has the frame narrative where you genuinely believe he was read this book as a kid and he's edited the book and made the good bits. The real book doesn't exist. Like, the real book title is The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure, the good parts version. And he really plays that up in the book. And the other aspect I love is it has footnotes littered throughout the book. And it says things like, this is a time before denim was invented, but people were aware of the concept. Or Buttercup was 900th most gorgeous woman of the year once she started washing her elbows. And it's so clever. Like, it's no wonder the film has the degree of that meta, but you're in for a treat if you read the book.
It's very Python-esque, isn't it? I think that doesn't always get talked about as an influence on The Princess Bride, but the bit where Wesley falls down the hill, and rather than run after them, Buttercup decides she has to fall down the hill in the exact same
with
way.
a male stunt double. A male stunt double. If you watch, he's so bulky as he does the roll down the hill. Whenever I watch this film with someone, I have to be like, which version do you want? Would you like me to interject and add all my facts that I know about the film, or are we just going to sit and watch it? Because I'm full of facts.
Well, that's quite appropriate, because you're basically giving them the footnotes version, right?
Obeying the tradition.
With the Python thing, I think it feels very close to Time Bandits, sort of tonally.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think Time Bandits finds its own way to do to the skip to the good bits ethos, doesn't it? Time Bandits is like the highlights reel of a load of movies Terry Gilliam could have made instead. And this is just, as I say, a fairy story where somebody's removed the dull bits. We mentioned that it has this extraordinarily stacked cast. Who were our cast highlights?
I mean, all of them is the correct answer, but I think for me, like Carrie Elwes is astonishing as that swashbuckling role. That kind of throwback to 1940s kind of Robin Hood figure, which he then would play in Men in Tights.
Yes.
And what I really love is he and Robin Wright were really in love with each other when they made the film, but neither of them knew each other had a crush. And I just really love watching that kind of play out. And I think for me, with Carrie in particular, this is sort of one of his first roles, obviously his biggest at that point, is he says that line, it's my favourite line in the film, there's a shortage of perfect breasts in this world, it would be a pity to damage yours. I think there are very few men who could say that line and it not be creepy, let alone be swoon-worthy like it is in this film.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big standouts for me is Wallace Shawn, who I think is absolutely extraordinary. Most of the killer lines, inconceivable, land war in Asia, again, the old cloud of quotes that come to you before you actually sit down and watch the film. Most of them are Shawn's, and I think there's something about Wallace Shawn where he's kind of a double act specialist. I think maybe it's just him being in My Dinner with Andre gave him a certain knack for that. But I think whatever character Vizzini is in a scene with, he just plays off so well. He forms this immediate double act with, and you feel like they must be some sort of comedy troupe who've been touring for decades. But no, they're just actors he's acting alongside, and he just has this really easy comic chemistry with everyone he meets.
Which is so interesting you say that, because he was so nervous on set that he literally shook the set, apparently with his nerves. He had real imposter syndrome and kept saying to Rob, like, am I meant to be here? Why am I here? Should I be here? And you'd have no idea because of the ease of his delivery.
Yeah, totally.
I think Andre the Giant's an interesting inclusion as well, because now you talk about wrestlers turned actors, and it's such a fruitful place. I mean, Dave Bautista's outstanding. He's really shook off those shackles. But this time, we're talking about an era where Hulk Hogan, I think he did like sort of Muscle Nanny or whatever that movie was called. He did like these ridiculous movies based on the fact
Commando, Santa with muscles. I think that is, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah. But in the midst of all that, you've got a wrestler who was known for being just really big. He wasn't known as Serena Speaker like Andre the Giant, but he's very charming in this and effortless. I think he's a very calming presence for what is essentially just the sort of the brute character. I'm not going to give him the credit of sort of forging ahead and making these brute characters a little bit more human, but he's an important step on a path to things like Groot or what have you in the MCU and characters like that.
He's got a soulfulness to him, hasn't he, Andre the Giant? There's a real sensitivity to him that I think is appealing. And I mean, I know what I know about wrestling could fill a matchbox. So I'm sure that he would have been remembered for his wrestling career without this, but there is a part of The Princess Bride that made him an icon, that gave him a posse, if you will.
Yeah, it's interesting as well.
Famously has a posse.
Yes, because he is he's around 7 foot. So I'm assuming in the production there was a lot of people standing on on little sort of shelves, basically, at getting sort of eyeline with him. Otherwise, it'd just look ridiculous with this absolute huge man with tiny, tiny little actors.
In his book, As You Wish, Cary Elwes talks so highly of Andre the Giant and how they sort of adapted filming for him, his lack of experience. And one of my standout sort of anecdotes from it is how he used to drink like a 6-pack of beer, Andre did, by just opening the 6 and guzzling it. Like, he was so big, that was one beer for him.
Yeah, I think so. Goldman talks very highly about him in Which Lie Do I Tell Eve? I think, yeah. No, Goldman talks very highly of him in Which Lie Did I Tell? And I think when he died, Goldman actually wrote an obituary for the paper of Andre the Giant because they'd got on so well on set. I think he does seem to be that guy whom no one had a bad word to say about.
Very sweet inclusion, I think, yeah. But yeah, this is a surprise to me because this is one of these movies where I've watched it so much that I think I've seen it all, but it's... Of the movies that we've watched today, it's the most rewarding, I think, on multiple views, because it has that sort of very sly aspect to it. Like, this time I didn't realise that what is it? It's not Mad Max, that's not his name. Clearly, that's not his name. But the one who brings... That's it, yes. His wife, I didn't realise it was Carol Kane until this time. I was like, watching it. Is that sounds like Carol Kane.
Valerie, to give her real name.
Yeah, and when I watched the credits, yes. A little small triumph that I had there with just the sort of level of casting, I guess, that just runs deep in this, that it doesn't need to have these players occupied by named actors, but it does, and it adds like a sort of real warmth to it, I think. Almost makes it feel like Panto to a degree, but yeah.
Yeah, like with Mel Smith for British audiences is such a joy. And my other fun fact is he was allergic to the contact lenses he wore, and he had such a horrific time making the film. He never watched it because of those contact lenses.
Right. It's a good performance, that Mel Smith performance. I have never really thought about Mel Smith outside of, comedy troupes he's been in part of, whether that's Not the 9 O'Clock News or his partnership with Griff Rhys-Jones. But it's really nice to see him on his own get a really good part and do really fun things with it.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts on Princess Bride? I mean, this is one of these movies that you really... I mean, the same with Spinal Tap, you just say, I really like the bit where it's basically quote tennis, isn't it? I say a good quote, then everybody else says a good quote, and we just pass it back and forth between each other. But it's a fun movie, I think, and it has its longevity because of just the little touches that are deep within it. Like Graham mentioned earlier, you can reference it to Shrek, but I don't think Shrek has the size of heart that this movie does, really.
Yes.
Definitely. I did used to use Shrek, so I ran a film club. My day job is as a secondary school teacher, and I ran a film club. Every Monday after school, we watched a film. And I'd adapt it for the kids' interests some years, and I ran it for 9 years, but every year, at least once, I'd show The Princess Bride. And it'd be a different group of kids sometimes. Some would see it the same kids every year. And I would use Shrek as the buy-in, because that is our reference point, the idea of blending those genres for parody, but also because they love the genres. And The Princess Bride always went down a treat, whether it was watching my one-woman performance behind my computer as I was working or for the actual film.
The other thing that I really want to note before we move on is that part of the reason why the sort of sincere bits of this land is because it looks absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's shot by Adrian Biddle, who's come straight to this from his first credit as a cinematographer, which was James Cameron's Aliens, a tonally slightly different film, I would argue. But he makes it look like a great old Technicolor movie. Like when you first see the castle in it with Christopher Guest's character, I just kept thinking of Laurence Olivier's Henry V. And I think the fact that it has this level of craft backing it up, it makes the romantic parts more romantic. It makes the funny parts funnier. It just lifts everything.
It does as well, and it's sort of an audience participation movie as well.
Yeah, we watched it.
In the sense of one character.
Were you going to say
one character? My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
I was on the fencing team at uni, and we watched it, and that would be our film, because the fencing in it is one of the best you're going to find in cinema. They used the leading UK Olympic athletes in fencing for the choreography, who also did Star Wars, the lightsaber sequences.
Oh, wow. That explains why they're so good then, yeah.
Yeah, and then one of them, I think it was Carrie, might have had a massive injury just before they filmed that extended sequence, and they spent the entire filming rehearsing that scene because it was so important to them, and it really threw it into jeopardy. A bit like, I guess, with Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, the bone break.
I mean, Carrie Elwes is just incredible in this. I don't know how this was produced without anybody breaking into sort of, hysterics. Because when he just can't control his body, I don't know how anybody managed to act opposite that, really. It's a credit to the production, I think. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's got hundreds of hours of outtakes. I don't know.
Maybe it is, yeah. Maybe that's another running theme we're having with these movies. Lots of quotes and lots of outtakes.
Yeah. So any final thoughts on Princess Bride before we move on?
No, I'll stop now, because if I've really got going, they'll be here for 2-hour runtime, so we're not going to do that.
Graham?
No, I think I've covered it.
At the beginning of the school year, he had buried a quart jar of pennies underneath his house. He drew a treasure map so he could find them again. A week later, his mom cleaned out his room and threw away the map. Vern had been trying to find those pennies for 9 months. 9 months, man. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry.
Jesus Christ, Billy, we gotta do something.
Why? Who cares?
We saw him.
So? It ain't nothing to us. The kid's dead, so it ain't nothing to him neither. And who gives a shit if they ever find him? I don't.
But it's that kid they were talking about on the radio. Brocker. Or Brower, or Flowers, whatever his name is. The train must have hit him.
Big fucking deal.
We had all followed the Ray Brower story very closely because he was a kid our age. 3 days before, he had gone out to pick blueberries, and nobody'd seen him since.
I think we should tell the cops.
You don't go squawking to the cops after you boosted a car, you idiot. They're gonna want to know how the hell we got way out on Back Harlow Road. Now they know we don't got no car. It's best we just keep our mouths shut, and then they can't touch us.
Look, we can make an ominous call.
They trace those calls, stupid. I seen it on Highway Patrol and on Dragnet.
Yeah, right. I just wish we never boosted that goddamn Dodge. I wish Ace had been with us. Could have told the cops who was in his car.
Well, he wasn't.
We're gonna tell him?
We're not gonna tell nobody. Nobody never. You dig me?
I know the Back Harlow Road. It comes to a dead end by the Royal River. The train tracks are right there. Me and my dad used to fish for Cossies out there.
Jesus Christ, man. If they would have known you were under there, they would have killed you. Could he have gotten all the way from Chamberlain to Harlow? That's really far. Sure. He must have started walking on the train tracks and just followed them the whole way.
Yeah, right. And then after dark, train must have come along and all smacko.
Yeah. Hey, you guys. I bet you anything that if we find him, we'll get our pictures in the paper.
Yeah, we can even be on TV. Sure, we'll be heroes.
Yes, now we've come to the part of the show where we're picking who we're talking about in the upcoming episode, and this is one for me, I think, quite firmly. But Japanese, I don't want to pen him into horror, but he is an extraordinaire, and he will always get known as the other guy who is called Kurosawa, Kiyoshi Kurosawa.
Nice.
I mean, what a person's name to live under the legacy of, really, isn't it? It's unfortunate.
It is a
really,
bit like, it is a bit like being a Western director called Terry Hitchcock.
Yeah. Impossible to live with.
But he's carved his own space. He certainly, has his... I think when people talk about a Kurosawa film now, they do have to specify in cinephile circles which one they're talking about. But yeah, I haven't actually seen much of his work. Which is the one with there's one with like a curse spread by computer?
That's Pulse, or Cairo.
Cairo, yeah, I'd seen that and I thought that was very good.
The one which I think is genuinely one of the best horror movies that I've ever seen is Cure. Is mid-90s one. It's genuinely miraculous. His style it's terrifying, but nothing's happening, and I don't know how he does it. It's some sort of witchcraft. It's very, very impressive.
Yeah, I like I say, I'm not that experienced, but I love the idea of him. I love that there's this guy who makes like J-horror films and then goes off and does sensitive dramas that get nominated for Best International Film at the Oscars. I mean, if you want proof that we're living in a post-genre snobbery world, there you go, there's your man.
No, absolutely, yeah. He's incredible. I'm looking forward to doing that. Because the people who I'm organising the episode with, they're all very, very knowledgeable. So by the end of that podcast, I think I'll be doing about 30 movies. So that should be fun.
You dirty bird. How could you? She can't be dead. Misery Chastain cannot be dead.
Annie, in 1871, women often died in childbirth. But her spirit is the important thing, and Misery's spirit is still alive.
I don't want her dead! I want her! And you murdered her!
No! I didn't.
Who did?
No one. She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away? Slipped away? She didn't just slip away! You did it! 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 You murdered my Misery!
Annie!
I thought you were good, Paul. But you're not good. You're just another lying old dirty birdie. And I don't think I better be around you for a while. Don't even think about anybody coming for you. Not the doctors, not your agent, not your family, because I never called them. Nobody knows you're here. And you better hope nothing happens to me. Because if I die, you die.
The third movie of this trilogy, 1990s Misery. I'll do a synopsis for this, and hopefully it goes okay, even with sort of a bad internet connection. But Paul Sheldon he's basically a surrogate for Stephen King, which is this is an adaptation of. He's a very successful author. He writes a book around a character called Misery Chastain. He's wrote the last book. He's had enough of that series, and as he goes, he's driving away, frankly recklessly, because clearly it's a snowing outside, and they go driving in the snow. He's asking for what happens to him, frankly, but nonetheless, he crashes his car quite horrifically, and he's saved by Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy. Oh, I had it so close. Kathy Bates. Have I got the name right? Yes.
Kathy Bates. Yes.
Who is his number one fan, who both nurses him back to health and drugs him massively, and takes a very, very personal stake in the development of the latest book in that series. It's a house arrest movie recently, basically a Stockholm Syndrome type situation. Well, that's the setup at least, anyway.
It's basically a film about what Game of Thrones fans want to do to George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, it's funny how the sort of the perception of fans have changed, really, isn't it? This is like real outlier stuff in the 90s, but now it's just a normal fan.
Yeah, like I was about to name another director, and I remembered that I'm a female film critic, and therefore would receive a lot of hate online if I mentioned a specific director.
You can tell us off air.
But Charlotte, what are your feelings on Misery?
I really, really enjoyed this. I hadn't seen it all in one go. Again, like the recurring theme of today, I knew the reference points, I knew certain scenes, and I didn't realise that the DNA that links this to some of Rob Reiner's other work. The fact that Rob Reiner's in it as an uncredited cameo, as a pilot. The fact that William Goldman did the script for it, editing Stephen King's book. And you've got like Mark Shaman did the score, who also did A Few Good Men. It's incredible once you realise all those kind of threads that link it together. And I wrote down, to link on what you said, I wrote Stan in capital letters in my notes. So I feel like Eminem might have seen this film and was inspired, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, as Rob said, Annie Wilkes is a very frightening character in the context of like late 80s, early 90s pop culture, but these days she'd be like the most normal Nicki Minaj fan.
Yeah, it's... I'm allowed to say this, Taylor Swift, because she has a militant section to her fan base.
I think, yeah, I'm your shield on that. If they want to go for anyone, they can go for the traitor.
Okay. But
yes.
I mean, the one thing I will say about this, it's one of those things, it's surprisingly tame. Because I've never seen it before. I've only seen it through the many, many, many things it's been referenced in. But it's much lighter than its history, its image would suggest, which was interesting, I thought.
I think that's a large part of what I found fascinating about it, because I'll complete the hat trick. I'd never seen the whole thing before either. It was always a bit of a list of shame thing with me. And I remember when I was growing up, it was a huge talking point about the thing with the sledgehammer. Oh, you don't want to see the scene with the sledgehammer. The scene with the sledgehammer is the most horrific. It isn't the most horrific thing you've ever seen, obviously, but I think there is a genius to doing mainstream horror for a mainstream audience, and I think the fact that it's the mainstream horror for a mainstream audience is so often bad just goes to show how hard it is. I think the brilliance, the part of Rob Reiner's talent that we're seeing here is that he knows exactly how to get a mainstream audience to watch something that's just a tiny bit nastier than what they'd go for normally. And I'm fascinated by directors who can do that kind of balancing act.
But it's an odd movie, really. I think it feels kind of abridged. Like the inclusion of the sheriff, that just feels like it's padding to me, honestly, because of how it ends. It doesn't feel like that arc of the narrative really has like a satisfying conclusion. Given what happens to him, it just sort of like drops him like, that's it. Okay, that's fine. So why were we spending all of this little time for such a dead end, really, it feels like to me.
So inventive, though, like almost levels of Psycho in terms of you think that's what's going to happen and then bam, that isn't what's going to happen and it's done with. And I think that's then a play on the book itself, right? The idea of the book not being enough or adequate.
I was going to say, I think this has exposed my own psychotic fandom, because when that sheriff died, I thought, how dare you, Stephen, criticise Stanley Kubrick for what he did with Scatman Crothers in The Shining when you've just done it there. But you know what? I thought it worked in The Shining, and I thought it works here.
I think my reservation is because he's such a nice and likeable character. He adds sort of a levity to it, because it is very slow when it's just Paul and Kathy in the cabin. Not a lot really happens, so he sort of keeps the pacing feel a bit more buoyant.
Keeps the misery at bay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it.
He's Richard Farnsworth, who would go on to be in David Lynch's The Straight Story, and he's got that exact kind of warmth to him here as well.
But yeah, it's one of those movies, it's again a weird sort of comparison point, but 127 hours, where at the time it was like, I didn't go to see it for such a long time because I thought the cutting scene would be so graphic, and your imagination is much more sadistic than movies can possibly be. So when Graham mentioned the sort of the hobbling, as it's called, you think, oh, this is going to be really graphic. But maybe it was at the time, but it's just modern movies have become quite grotesque and make it feel quite cute.
Is it not the same?
I don't know. It's an interesting thing.
Is it not the same principle, though, as the ear-cutting scene in Reservoir Dogs? Like you're saying, the imagination makes it so much worse. But that then is less effective by you being retold, whereas seeing it firsthand.
You see a tiny part of the hobbling, but you imagine you've seen something much more, I think. Yeah.
It's kind of elevated a bit, I think, too much. I don't think it's even Paul Reiner's best adaptation of Stephen King. I think that is Stand By Me. I think that is, well, as far as adaptations, I don't know, but it's a better movie, is all I'm saying.
I'll go with you on that. I adore Stand By Me, but I was really pleasantly surprised with how well this stood up. And I think a large part of the credit has to go to the central duo. I think James Caan and Kathy Bates are so good in this. I mean, there's, again, in William Goldman's book, he goes through all of the male actors who turned this down, and it's basically any movie star you can think of at this time. You know, Dustin Hoffman didn't want to do it. Robert Redford didn't want to do it. Warren Beatty spent what felt like about a century umming and ahhing over it, didn't want to do it. And but I think it's so great that they ended up with James Caan, who's kind of a star without an image. Everyone knows who he is. Everyone's at least seen him in The Godfather. But what is a James Caan character? You can't quite pin that down, and I think that works in the film's favour. Like, if it's Robert Redford, you know he's getting out, because he's the Sundance Kid. You know, the Sundance Kid always gets out of impossible situations. But with James Caan, you think, yeah, this guy might die.
I like how you referred to The Godfather, where I was like, the dad in Elf. Yeah. There's a real... I'd argue we've got a villain problem with cinema at the moment, having like a really good villain. And Kathy Bates in this film, like the AFI gave her number 17 for top villain of all time. And her performance is extraordinary, because I don't think it's incomparable in terms of the narrative arc she goes on and how evil she is, and like the fixation on profanity. I really struck me watching it.
Mm-hmm.
So we can murder. Murder's fine. Ankle breaking, fine. No swearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a more relatable bad guy, really, isn't it? Because I think bad guys now are bad guys with a capital bad guy with a hat, which is sort of at a skew angle to show how bad they really are. Whereas she feels more like a character. She feels like a character, Kathy Bates. Because I think they fleshed out the story a lot more than maybe they'd give other movies of this type.
I think when you read like people who were involved in it, like Goldman or Reiner talking about it, the interesting thing is they all talk about Annie Wilkes as needing to be partly likeable, which is so interesting to me, because there's an alternative version of Hollywood where this fell into the hands of, Adrian Lyne or Joe Esterhaz or someone like that, and it just became, this is this evil bitch, let's kill her. And I think there's always something pitiable about Annie that is really interesting, that even when she's doing reprehensible things, you get a sense of her as someone who is helpless and not really in control.
Is every man as far as villains go?
Yeah,
There's not a lot of them, really. Makes it more real.
Can I just give a shout out to my favourite bit part in this movie, who is the sheriff who does the press conference about Paul's disappearance? And he's just stood in front of all of these news reporters who have come to hear what's happened to the big celebrity novelist, and he's saying, yeah, we could find a body, we'll look for that, unless of course the animals have eaten him first. And he's really inappropriately graphic about all of this stuff. I think people often talk about this as being very autobiographical for Stephen King, because, as is often the case with Stephen King, the hero is a writer, but I would argue that sheriff is Stephen King's real self-insert character.
It has, when you mention that, it does have a kind of, it's akin to the more absurd side of the Coen Brothers work. It has that sort of grotesque character nature about it. Yeah,
definitely, yeah. Things like the obsession with not swearing that Annie has, or the fact that it starts with the hero lighting a cigarette and really enjoying it, which is something I don't think has happened in American movies since 1990. But everyone has these little quirks and foibles that just they make it feel higher stakes. As you said, Rob, it's not a story about goodies versus baddies. It's a story about two people in a really desperate situation, but sort of played just kind of slightly campy, slightly mainstreaming it to a point where it's not unbearable for a mass audience, but that is still what it is.
It does end with I don't know if ambiguity would be the right word, but a sense of intrigue to it, because Paul he does survive, but also he's seeing Kathy Bates and Annie Wilkes just about. That feels like it's a disaster waiting to happen, so it has this interesting wrinkle at the end, I think. This interesting character beat.
He never wrote a sequel to this one, did he? We talked about Dr. Sleep earlier, but I don't think King ever followed this up.
No, because I think it'd just be the author character going nuts on some poor woman, which I don't think would be not really a Stephen King thing.
Do that. Yeah, I guess, yeah, but it feels like maybe that's kind of an A24 idea. Maybe they're going to turn Misery into a story about trauma.
I can feel the disdain through those words. I really could.
I like a lot of A24 stuff. I just don't like the tote bagization of them, I guess.
Any closing thoughts on this, Charlotte?
Yeah, with the epilogue, I thought a lot about that exchange he has with his agent over why don't you do a non-fiction, a retelling of what happened. And that aspect, again, just feels so current, that kind of cannibalization of your life within art, especially with Baby Reindeer on Netflix. Just really interesting how this was, 34 years old, this film, the story a little bit older, and yet it's still so relevant. That's what I think is so incredible about the films Rob Reiner chose at that point.
Yeah, I think that's ageless, really, aren't they? All three of them.
They do. Yeah, they do have that timeless quality, I think.
So, to wrap up, just feelings in general on Rob Reiner, in particular his legacy. I know you can just say this run of movies, but that'd be a very sort of gross simplification, I think, of his career. But yes, what is his legacy as a filmmaker in particular?
I mean, it is this run of movies, but I think that's interesting. I think it's fascinating that in the 2000s there was a sense of regret that he'd fell off, but now it doesn't matter. He spent like the past 10, 15 years making movies that look like the fake posters you see when movie characters go to the cinema. The magic of Belle Isle and So It Goes, Being Charlie. I'm not 100% convinced that these movies exist, but it doesn't matter because this is Spinal Tap is bulletproof, Stand By Me is bulletproof, The Princess Bride is bulletproof, When Harry Met Sally is bulletproof. It's just one of those things that's always going to last, and as we just said, there is a timeless quality to them. I think out of the three we've watched today, The Princess Bride actually feels most 80s, if only because of that sort of Mark Knopfler score and all of the lovely practical effects. But Misery is just as fresh as it ever was. This is Spinal Tap, even more so. I don't think these films will age. I don't think they'll ever look outdated.
And it's, especially I was thinking about, as a director, what does he personify? What does he kind of stand for? How does his oeuvre interlink? And I was thinking like Steven Spielberg, Scorsese, their films do have that kind of shared DNA, but on paper, particularly that 80s run, those films have nothing in common. And I was thinking that maybe that's a sign of his amazingness. It's not the best word there. His talent as a director is the fact he could elevate whoever he was working with and give a voice to the genre and the writer, like Nora Ephron, Aaron Sorkin, William Goldman, these incredible writers that perhaps it's less so that Rob Reiner's voice, but his ability to collaborate is what should really be celebrated.
I think that's very true. Yeah, you've reminded me of something I always say about Stanley Donen, in that Stanley Donen never gets his due because it's too easy to interpret all of his great movies as having someone else's voice. Singing in the Rain is a Gene Kelly movie. Bedazzled is a Peter Cook and Dudley Moore movie. But, I mean, yes, but they're also all Stanley Donen movies, and the fact that he can channel collaborators with such a distinctive creative voice and get them to produce their best screen work is actually really incredible. And yeah, I think you're right, you can say the exact same thing about Rob Reiner.
I don't think I can really end this without giving both of you the opportunity to talk about some of the other movies in this incredible run. Not to the same depth or extent, but just between the two of you, is there any others in this run that really stands out for you that could have been just as easily included on this episode?
Charlotte, do you want to take this one first? Because I've been jumping in a lot.
I'd go When Harry Met Sally. I think it's the perfect rom-com. And especially that ending. Again, it's another film where we've known references through things, but you didn't get they came from that film until you saw the film. And my experience of watching that in my mid-20s at the BFI, Simon Pegg, I think, introduced the film beforehand. And it was just like, oh, wow, this film is incredible. And again, that timeless quality really stays with me, that film.
No, absolutely. I think, as the mainstream romantic comedy fell from grace, When Harry Met Sally just looks more and more incredible as a film that is obviously doing the same thing as a modern studio rom-com, but is doing them effortlessly better. It's so good. And I think Stand By Me, I know we've mentioned it a bit, but I remember I had an English teacher who used to teach story structure by showing us Stand By Me. And it's funny because it's not a tightly structured movie on the surface. It's a baggy road trip movie where people tell stories and you see the story reenacted, and it should feel really loose and discursive, but it's not. It's really disciplined, good, focused storytelling. I think that's an amazing film.
With When Harry Met Sally, I've not seen that, but it is often cited as one of the, not necessarily final, but it was in that final run before the rom-com became a dirty word. And it really has. There were like legitimate pieces of good storytelling and good cinema, and then just Katherine Heigl vehicles all over the place. That's all they are.
These are fighting words, because I think that you can't tarnish all of those films with the same brush. And each of those films does have a place.
Yes.
It's that DNA, and these films are all interconnected. There are some dodgy ones there, and there are definitely some dodgy attitudes, as is with all things from the noughties in terms of gender and relationships. And I've had to unpick a lot of my romantic expectations from some of these awful films. But there is some good stuff there, and like Anyone But You, no, is that the right title? I'm getting my rom-coms mixed up. The Glenn Powell film.
Beeps. Yes.
Did I get the title right?
I think that's
I feel like I've read many books with that title as well. Just proves that there's this real yearning for it, or like Crazy Rich Asians. I don't know why I just got angry about, but yes. Rom-coms.
Yeah. Hopefully rom-coms do make a return, because there does seem like that groundswell of actual good ones being made.
And TV has had a lot of really good ones lately, be that Lovesick about 5-10 years ago to the more recent one that Johnny Flynn did. I've forgotten every title.
Starstruck.
Thank you.
Now, was that one? Was it Rye Lane? Is that the name? The one set in London? That was very good too.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. They're coming back in a small way. I know it's only tangentially related to Rob Reiner, but it is what it is, I guess.
Before we move on from Rob Reiner, though, I just want to say, I'm not familiar with a lot of his acting stuff. A lot of his pre-fame acting stuff was on like 70s sitcoms, and it was a time before I think American television travelled as much as it did. But acting-wise, I just want to give a shout-out to his role as Leonardo DiCaprio's dad in The Wolf of Wall Street, which absolutely makes me howl. I think it is so funny, and his volcanic rage when someone phones him when The Equalizer's on is something that I think we can all relate to.
And he's also Jess's dad in New Girl, Zooey Deschanel's character. He plays her dad, and he's so good in that. He steals every episode he's in.
Did not know that.
Is there enough territory for him as an actor in the actor's episode, do you think?
You'd have to take in a fair bit of TV, I think, which we have done on the Reece Shearsmith episode, so yeah, who knows?
We did. And I can only, wrapping up now, and I can only apologise for my lack of my lack of communication in this one, because the internet has been, let's just say, horrible. So, yes, I apologise for that profusely, but to wrap up, Charlotte, where can we find you and the stuff you do online?
Best place would be Twitter/X at Sometimes Movies.
And Graham?
I'm on Letterboxd, just search for Graham Williamson, and I'm also on Instagram at Graham W Film.
And thank you very much for listening. I'll be back next time with huge left turn as far as tones go, but Kiyoshi Kurosawa for another Director's episode.